She won't inherit anything. Dad hated her. That's what my older sister Vanessa said the moment I stepped into my dad's study. There is no greeting, no eye contact, just that sharp cut sentence loud enough for everyone to hear, like she wanted it to echo off the walls of my dad Raymond's beloved study. I felt the words slice through my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs like it did during emergency codes at the hospital. My grip on my son Ethan's hand tightened instinctively, my nursing instincts kicking in to protect what mattered most. His small fingers curled back around mine, warm and trembling against my palm, his artist sensitivity picking up every emotion in the room. I forced a smile down at him, thin and shaky, but he knew what I was feeling beneath my facade. He always knew, with that perception that made him seem older than 10. I hadn't even taken a seat yet, but the message was clear. I wasn't welcome in this house I once called home. I wasn't family despite the blood we shared. I was just a loose end they were here to snip clean, like a problematic suture. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, perfectly poised in a gray designer suit worth more than 3 months of my nursing salary, her dark hair scraped into that tight bun she always wore when she wanted to feel superior to everyone, especially her younger sister. Her lipstick was sharp red, classic Vanessa wore paint for a battle I didn't know I'd walked into, though I should have expected the ambush. Then came the voice that sent ice down my spine. My Uncle Warren, Dad's older brother and struggling real estate developer, let out a dry laugh that grated on my nerves. He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced behind his head, that smug smirk of his spreading like oil across his face. Even her kid knows she's worthless, Warren muttered, nodding toward Ethan like he wasn't even human, just collateral damage in their campaign against me. Ethan lowered his eyes to the floor, his small shoulders tensing beneath his carefully chosen button-up shirt that he'd insisted on wearing today. My heart cracked a little deeper, pain radiating through my chest. Around the room, a few heads nodded. My cousins, old neighbors, family friends I hadn't seen in years, all seated in my dad's study like they belonged there more than I did. People who'd long since picked sides, and I wasn't on theirs. I swallowed hard, my nurse's composure threatening to crack despite years of practice staying calm in emergencies. My throat felt like sandpaper, parched from anxiety and wounded pride. The air was stale with the smell of dust, leather chairs, and whatever overly sweet perfume Vanessa had bathed in that morning, preparing for her moment of triumph. I could feel my pulse in my ears, loud, hot, and humiliating. I led Ethan to the farthest chair at the end of the long mahogany table that had witnessed countless silent family dinners, away from the pack that had already decided our fate. The chair creaked when I sat, announcing my presence when I wished to be invisible. Ethan climbed up beside me, his legs swinging above the floor, his hands folded in his lap like he was trying to disappear, a skill he'd learned too young in our small apartment. Vanessa turned her head slowly toward me, and when our eyes met, she smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just pity soaked in poison. "You know this is pointless, right?" my sister Vanessa said, voice smooth and cold as the marble countertops in her luxury kitchen. "Dad rewrote the will, cut you out completely. Said you were dead to him the day you refused the company position." I didn't respond, though my mind filled with memories of double shifts at the pediatric ward. To be honest, I couldn't. My tongue sat heavy in my mouth, useless. I just nodded slightly like I understood, but inside my mind screamed. Why did I even come to this suburban mansion I once called home? I thought maybe there'd be something from the businessman who raised us to value success above all. A note, a line, a sign Raymond Mitchell remembered his younger daughter. Something to make it all make sense, to justify the decade of struggling to make rent while caring for Ethan alone. Instead, I was back in the one place I promised myself I'd never return to, surrounded by people who made it clear they had already buried me long before they buried him. And just as I was about to stand to leave before they started carving up the estate like vultures, the door creaked open. Mr. Daniels, my dad's lawyer and confidant for 30 years, entered the room clutching a thick folder beneath his arm. He looked exactly the same, neatly pressed, tired eyes, and a face that gave nothing away, the perfect keeper of family secrets. The room fell silent. Everyone sat up a little straighter, wealth and expectation hanging in the air. This was it. I braced myself for humiliation, my nursing scrubs from the morning shift suddenly feeling out of place among their designer clothes. I came expecting nothing, and I'd leave with exactly that, returning to my small apartment and modest life. Or so I thought, because what no one in that room knew. Not Vanessa with her MBA, not Warren with his failing developments, not even me with my decade of absence, was that my son Ethan had brought something with him. And with one sentence he would unravel everything they thought they knew about the empire my dad built. You forgot the video he recorded. It had been 10 years since I stepped foot in a room like this with my family. 10 years since I packed up a life they said I didn't deserve, took Ethan, just 2 at the time, and left without looking back. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because every conversation with my dad Raymond ended in silence or shouting about my career choices. Because every family gathering felt like walking barefoot across glass while smiling for the camera. But now I was back. Back in a room that still smelled like expensive cologne and old anger. The irony. I didn't even know I was invited to the will reading. The envelope showed up a week after the funeral. No note, just the date, time, and address and Daniel's formal script. For a moment I wondered if it was a mistake. Maybe they meant to send it to Vanessa. Or maybe it was just a cruel final joke from beyond the grave. But Ethan wanted to go. He looked at me with those wide, soft eyes, his voice quiet but certain. "We should go, Mom," he said, his artist's intuition shining through. "Maybe there's something you need to hear." I don't know how a 10-year-old can carry that kind of wisdom, but he does. Sometimes I think he sees the world in ways most adults never learn to. So we came. I wore the plain black dress I hadn't touched since my mom's funeral, and he wore a little button-up but he picked himself. I braided his hair that morning with trembling hands, and he told me I looked beautiful despite the dark circles under my eyes. He didn't know I had barely slept, that I was terrified to face the people who'd treated me like a ghost for nearly a decade. I knew what they thought of me. Vanessa, the perfect daughter. She stayed, she helped. She took care of Dad while building her investment banking career. She made sure everyone saw her doing it, too, carefully crafting her social media presence around being the devoted daughter. She told the story so many times it became gospel. Audrey abandoned the family. Audrey couldn't handle real life. Audrey ran away from responsibility. They never asked why I left. They didn't know or didn't care that Dad stopped speaking to me after I refused to stay working for his company that was suffocating my dreams of becoming a nurse. That when I showed up on his porch with Ethan dragging my suitcase, he shut the door without saying a word. That the one person who was supposed to protect me from the world had become another wall I had to break through. And also Uncle Warren didn't help. He was Dad's echo, always repeating the same bitter phrases. Family doesn't quit. Blood is loyalty. Don't come back crying. And Vanessa. She soaked it all up and turned it into a script she could weaponize at family gatherings and business functions. So I stopped trying. I built a quiet life for Ethan and me in our small apartment. We were not wealthy, but we had peace and love and laughter between my hospital shifts. Still, part of me held on to the smallest, most fragile hope that maybe, in the end, Dad had seen something, regretted something, left something behind in his executive's heart. Maybe that's why I opened the envelope, why I showed up at the sprawling house I once called home. But now, sitting in that room, surrounded by hard eyes and smug smiles, I felt foolish for hoping. Ethan hadn't said a word since we sat down. He sat straight, hands in his lap, eyes scanning the room like he was studying each face, his artist's eye taking in every detail. His calm unnerved me a little, like he was waiting for something I couldn't see coming. And then Daniels cleared his throat and opened the folder. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "Just get through this. Don't let them see you break." But Ethan. He was sitting on something bigger than grief, and before this was over, he'd prove he was the only one in the room truly listening to my dad. Daniels cleared his throat again, the way lawyers do when they want the room's attention without actually asking for it. He adjusted his glasses, flipped open the folder, and began reading the will like it was just another Tuesday at his downtown office. I barely heard the first few lines, generic legal stuff, estate definitions, executive declarations from my dad's business empire. My mind was spinning, not with what he was saying, but with what I knew was coming. He wouldn't say my name, I was sure of it. Still, every time he paused to turn a page, I held my breath, like maybe, just maybe, the next words would be different. Maybe he'd surprise me with some last acknowledgement. But no, it was all the usual suspects. To my daughter Vanessa, I leave the primary residence and all its contents. Vanessa's face didn't move, but I could feel her satisfaction like perfume wafting across the table. She glanced sideways at her husband Blake, who gave her a smug little nod, like they were already planning renovations to my childhood home. To my brother Warren, the lake property, and all remaining shares in the family business. Warren leaned back further in his chair, arms folded, chin high, like a king surveying his newly acquired kingdom. I watched him slide an expensive pen between his fingers and tap it gently, like he'd already won something he'd coveted for years. To Paul, my nephew, the vintage car collection. Paul, my cousin who once locked me out of my own room at age 9 just to watch me cry. That Paul. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my face from cracking, my nursing training and emotional control barely holding. I could feel the tears gathering behind my eyes, hot and sharp, but I didn't let them fall. Still no mention of me, not even a footnote in Raymond Mitchell's legacy. Then came the line I'd been dreading. And as previously declared, my daughter Audrey will not receive a portion of this estate. There it was. Just simple. And besides, final. Like a hospital door closing on a life you couldn't save. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest, my nurse's composure crumbling. Ethan's fingers slipped into mine under the table, his artist's hands warm and reassuring. I hadn't even realized my hands were clenched in my lap. His touch brought me back, anchored me before I drifted too far. I could feel my heart beat behind my eyes. My skin burned with humiliation. And then came the whispers, low but intentional. Vanessa let out the softest scoff. Told you, she muttered to Blake. Uncle Warren shook his head like it was all so predictable. Takes a certain kind of person to walk away from her own father, he said, louder than he needed to. The others, the cousins, the so-called family friends, didn't say much, but their silence was just as loud. I stared down at the wood grain on the table, the lines twisted and spiraled, almost hypnotic. It was easier to look at that than their faces adorned with pity and judgment. I could hear my own voice inside my head, flat and hollow. Why did I come? Why did I think he'd remember me? But then, Ethan moved. He let go of my hand and sat up straighter, the small artist with a big secret. I felt the shift before I saw it. His voice cut through the tension like a tiny blade, soft but unshakable. You forgot the video he recorded. The room froze like a tableau. Vanessa blinked, her perfect composure faltering. Warren turned, his face suddenly alert. Daniels paused, pen still hovering over the page. I turned to Ethan, confusion flooding my brain. What video? I asked, barely above a whisper. But Ethan wasn't looking at me. He was looking straight ahead, steady, certain in a way only children can be. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small white envelope, slightly crumpled but sealed tight. My name was on the front, but underneath it was Dad's handwriting. For the lawyer only if it gets ugly. I didn't understand it yet, but Ethan did, and suddenly, for the first time all day, I felt the balance in the room shift like the moment when a patient turns the corner toward recovery. I stared at the envelope in my son Ethan's hands like it was radioactive waste I'd encountered in the hospital hazmat training. He held it so calmly, like it wasn't the most dangerous object in the room, his artistic temperament unruffled by the tension. But my eyes were locked on the handwriting across the front, sharp, all caps, unmistakable, the same handwriting I'd seen on corporate documents and birthday cards in another life. My dad's executive scrawl, for the lawyer only if IT gets ugly. Well, it had gotten ugly in this mahogany-paneled study, ugly enough to reopen decade-old wounds. I could barely find my voice, my nursing training and remaining calm during emergencies completely failing me. Ethan, where did you get that? I whispered, my hands suddenly trembling. He looked up at me, his expression soft but steady, an artist's quiet confidence in his eyes. Grandpa gave it to me a while ago. He told me to keep it safe until today, he said with a simplicity that children reserve for the most profound truths. My heart stuttered against my ribs like a faulty monitor. He gave it to you? I asked, struggling to reconcile the dad who disowned me with one who would trust my son. He nodded, his braided hair shifting slightly. The day we visited him, just me and him. You were at the hospital with that little boy who broke his arm. I blinked hard, trying to pull memory into focus through the fog of double shifts and struggle. I remembered that day 3 months ago. Ethan had asked if he could go with my neighbor to drop off something at Dad's sprawling suburban home, something about a school project on family history. It was the first time I let him go without me, a tentative bridge I never expected would hold weight. I had no idea they even spoke, that Raymond Mitchell, former CEO and family patriarch, had acknowledged his grandson while ignoring his daughter. Now Daniels reached across the table, his practiced legal neutrality giving nothing away. May I? He asked gently, and Ethan handed the envelope over without hesitation, like passing a baton in a relay. The entire room leaned in, suddenly alert like predators sensing a shift in the wind. Vanessa was squinting like she couldn't make sense of it, her perfect investment banker's composure faltering for the first time. Warren shifted in his seat, no longer slouched. For once nobody had anything to say, not even a cutting remark about my choices. The envelope made a quiet tearing sound as Daniels opened it, the paper surrendering its secret. Inside was a USB drive, small, black, ordinary. But my pulse kicked like it was a code blue alarm on the pediatric ward. Daniels furrowed his brow and pulled a note from the envelope too, another page in my dad's handwriting, the paper expensive and heavy. His eyes scanned it, and for the first time since he walked into the room, his legal composure cracked, just slightly. But I saw it, trained as I was to notice the smallest changes in a patient's condition. He didn't speak right away. He just nodded slowly, like something unspoken had been confirmed, like a diagnosis finally making sense. Everyone, Daniel said, his voice quieter now, the voice he must use for delivering complicated trusts. There is a video message from Raymond Mitchell, recorded before the final version of this will. It was sealed with instructions to be played only if this situation became contentious. His eyes flicked to Vanessa, then Warren, the messengers of that contention. They both shifted in their chairs, the power dynamic suddenly uncertain, the inheritance no longer the simple transfer of wealth they'd anticipated. Vanessa scoffed, her investment banker's confidence momentarily shaken. This is ridiculous. He didn't say anything about a video to me, she said, the slight emphasis revealing more than she intended. Uncle Warren leaned forward, voice harder now, the failing real estate developer sensing a threat to his windfall. We don't know what's even on that thing. Could be fake, manipulated. Daniels raised a hand, the gesture of someone accustomed to silencing wealthy clients. It's timestamp authenticated. I recognize the handwriting and signature, and per his instructions, I'm legally bound to play it regardless of objections. He plugged the USB into a sleek black laptop sitting on the desk beside him, the technology incongruous against the old money surroundings. The screen flickered to life, the logo dissolving into a black frame with a single word, play. The air in the room changed, thickening with tension like the moments before a thunderstorm. No one spoke. No one moved. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. I gripped the arms of my chair like they might keep me from floating off into some other world, the way I grip the rails of a patient's bed during a crisis. My breathing was shallow, shaky, like when I watch a critical patient's monitors fluctuate. Why would Dad leave a video? Why did Ethan become the keeper of this secret? What could Dad possibly want to say now, after 10 years of silence and rejection? Ethan didn't look nervous. He just sat still, eyes on the screen, like he already knew what was coming, his artist's perception seeing through the adult drama. Vanessa looked pale now, her lips pressed into a tight line, her perfect makeup suddenly emphasizing her anxiety. Warren had stopped tapping his expensive pen, frozen in anticipation. I wanted to run back to the safety of my hospital rounds. I wanted to cry like a little girl who just wanted her dad's approval. I wanted to scream at all the lost years. But mostly, I wanted to know what my dad needed to say so badly he entrusted it to my 10-year-old son. Daniels hit the spacebar. The screen went black for half a second, then flickered, and suddenly, there he was. It was my dad. older, thinner, sitting at his desk, wearing that navy sweater I bought him for his last birthday, the one I didn't know he'd ever worn until this moment. His hands were folded, his expression not cold, just tired. He looked straight into the camera, and then he started to speak. I didn't breathe. Not when the screen lit up. Not when I saw his face, the face that had turned away from me a decade ago. Not when I heard the first two words leave his mouth. Hi, Audrey. The room went silent. Pure, still, holy silence. Around me, chairs squeaked against the hardwood floor. Someone sniffed. But I didn't move. I sat there, hand over my mouth, tears slipping down my cheeks, feeling like something I didn't even know I was carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. After all the years of noise, of blame, of exile, of silence. He heard me. He finally heard me. And in the quiet that followed, no one could take that away. No one spoke when the screen went black. Not Vanessa, not Warren, not the cousins or the family friends who once smiled politely while ignoring the weight I carried through hospital corridors. Even Daniels sat still, his hand frozen above the mouse, as if stopping the video had also stopped time. I don't know how long I sat there. My hand was still over my mouth. My cheeks were wet, but I hadn't noticed the tears falling until I felt Ethan's hand slip into mine again. He wasn't crying. He just looked up at me with this small, knowing smile, like he'd been waiting the whole time for the truth to finally find a voice. I leaned down and kissed the top of his head, my heart aching with something too big for words. Love, relief, grief, all knotted together like the complicated emotions I help my young patients navigate. Across the room, Vanessa stood abruptly. Her chair screeched against the floor. She picked up her designer bag with shaking hands and walked out without a word. Blake trailed behind, red in the face, mumbling something under his breath about legal challenges. Warren stayed seated longer, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on nothing. When he finally stood, he looked at Daniels like he wanted to argue, but even he knew there was nothing to fight. My dad had spoken. His truth was now unignorable. The others followed, one by one. Some couldn't meet my eyes. A few offered quiet nods, pity or maybe respect. I couldn't tell through my nursing eyes accustomed to reading people's pain. Soon it was just the three of us left. Daniels gently closed the folder and cleared his throat. There will be some paperwork, he said, voice softer than before. But everything's in order. I nodded. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? He gave a small smile, genuine, and left us alone in the room. The silence that followed wasn't the same kind I had grown used to in my small apartment. This silence was peaceful, whole, like something had finally settled into place. I looked at Ethan, still holding my hand, still looking at me like I was the strongest person in the world. And maybe in his eyes I was. But he was the one who saved me, who carried that envelope like it was just a piece of paper, not the truth that would rewrite everything. We stayed a little longer. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed time to breathe. Maybe I wanted to sit in the one room where, for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged. I kept hearing Dad's voice in my head. He said, "I'm proud of you." 3 words I thought I'd never hear from Raymond Mitchell, business tycoon. Words I needed more than I ever admitted during those late hospital shifts. I thought about everything I'd carried, years of silence, of being blamed, of being erased. And now I wasn't erased. I was seen and heard, remembered. I looked at Ethan again. "Thank you," I whispered. He tilted his head. "For what?" "For being braver than me," I said. "For holding on to something that mattered when I was afraid to hope." He smiled, his artist's eyes bright. "I just wanted you to hear him." And I had. Not just in the video, but in the shift that came after, in the peace that filled the room once everyone else had left. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always come when you want it, but when it does, it changes everything. So no, I didn't walk out of that room broken. I walked out holding my son Ethan's hand, with my dad Raymond's words still echoing in my chest. I walked out whole, a nurse who finally received healing herself. And that silence finally meant something. If this story meant something to you, If you've ever been pushed aside, misjudged, or made to feel like your voice didn't matter, just know this: you are not invisible. And sometimes the truth takes time, but it will come to light.